The last envelope came on a Tuesday, and I almost didn't open it because I recognized my mother's handwriting on the return address. And by then, her handwriting had come to mean only one thing to me: another bill I was supposed to feel guilty about not paying. But this one was thin. And when I finally slid it open at my kitchen counter, standing up, still in my work badge, it wasn't a bill. It was a printed invitation, cream-colored, embossed, to a dedication ceremony. My parents' foundation, the thing they built their whole reputation on, the thing they'd once told a room full of people had brought honor back to this family after certain disappointments, was being renamed. And the name they were putting on it was mine. Mine. Danielle Voss, the daughter my father had introduced at his 60th birthday as the one we don't talk about. The daughter my mother had called to my face, in front of my aunt, a disgrace to everything they'd worked for. I sat down slowly. Because here's the thing nobody at that ceremony would understand. And here's the thing I need you to sit with. Before I explain any of it, I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 3 years. I hadn't given them permission. And the money that foundation was built on, the $20 million everyone assumed came from my father's business, did not come from my father's business. I know how that sounds. Let me take you back, because the invitation is the end of the story, and I want you to understand how I got there. My name is Danielle. I'm 34, and for most of my life I was what families like mine politely call the practical one, which is a nicer way of saying the one nobody expected much from. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a house that always looked more comfortable than it felt. My father, Gerald, ran a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. My mother, Louise, did what she called community work, which mostly meant serving on boards and hosting dinners where the goal was to be seen hosting dinners. And there were 2 of us, me and my brother Marcus, who is 4 years older and was, from the beginning, the one the light was pointed at. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. It took me a long time to be able to say it without my voice doing something. Marcus was charming. He was the kind of kid who could break a window and have you apologizing for standing too close to it. When he got into a good school, there was a party. When I got into a better one, my mother told me not to make it a whole thing, because Marcus was in a sensitive season. I learned early that in our house, my achievements were things to be managed so they didn't upset the ecosystem. If you've ever been the child who learned to shrink so someone else could feel tall, you already know the muscle I'm talking about. It doesn't go away just because you grow up. You carry it into every room. I became an accountant. Not glamorous, I know. Marcus liked to tell people I counted other people's money, which he thought was funny, but I was good at it. There's a certain kind of person who finds peace in a balanced ledger, in things adding up, in the quiet honesty of numbers that don't care whose feelings they hurt. That was me. Numbers never told me I was a disappointment. Numbers just told me the truth. Here's the part that matters, and I need you to hold on to it, because everything hinges on it. When I was 26, my grandmother died. My father's mother, Eleanor. And Eleanor and I had a relationship nobody in the family took seriously, because Eleanor was difficult and I was unimportant. And the family assumed 2 unimportant, difficult people spending time together didn't amount to anything worth watching. They were wrong about that. It amounted to everything. Eleanor had money. Not the money my father talked about. His was leveraged, always one bad quarter from anxiety, though he'd have died before admitting it. Eleanor's money was old and quiet. She'd married into a family that had sold off timberland generations back and simply never spent the proceeds the way you'd expect. She lived in a small house. She drove a 15-year-old Buick, and she watched for decades how her son and his wife treated the granddaughter who reminded her, she once told me, of her own younger self. The one they kept in the corner because she saw too clearly. When she got sick, I was the one who drove out to Loveland twice a week. Marcus visited twice in 2 years, and both times he asked, and on his way out, whether she'd sorted out her affairs. My parents visited when it looked good to visit. I sat with her through the bad nights. I read to her. I did her actual finances because her accounts were a mess and she trusted me to touch them. And in the last year of her life, Eleanor did something quietly, with a lawyer in Greeley I'd never met, that would take my whole family 9 years to fully understand. She left the bulk of her estate, a little over $20 million, mostly in investments that had compounded untouched for a very long time, not to my father, to a trust. And she named me as its administrator, with a mandate that the money be used for charitable purposes at the discretion of my granddaughter Danielle, who is the only one of them who ever gave anything without counting what she'd get back. I need to be honest about what I did next, because this is the part I'm not proud of. And if I skip it, you won't understand how I let things go as far as they did. I didn't tell them, not out of some brilliant strategy, out of fear. I was 27 and I knew the way. You know, a stove is hot without touching it. That the moment my father learned his mother had passed him over for me, the ground under our family would open up. So I did the cowardly, human thing. I set up the charitable foundation, the way Eleanor's documents required. I ran it quietly. I kept my name off the letterhead as much as I legally could, using the family name instead, because it felt safer, smaller, less like a target. The Voss Family Foundation. I let it read as though it belonged to all of us. And that decision, that one soft, frightened choice to keep the peace, became the thread my father used to sew the whole lie together. Because here's what happened. Within 2 years, my father was telling people the foundation was his idea, his money, his legacy project. And I let him. God help me, I let him. Because when he stood at podiums and talked about giving back, it was the first time in my adult life he'd looked at me across a room without disappointment. He'd catch my eye during those speeches and give me a small nod, and I was so starved that a nod could buy my silence for months. You have to understand how the hunger works. If you've never had it, it looks like weakness. If you've had it, you know it's just a child still waiting at a window, hoping the car in the driveway is finally for her. For a while, the arrangement even felt like family. My mother started including me in things. I got invited to the dinners. I sat at the table instead of managing it. And I told myself the price letting them believe a comfortable fiction about where the money came from was worth it. Numbers that don't add up eventually demand to be corrected, but I kept telling myself this was one ledger I could leave unbalanced forever. Then Marcus's business failed, not gently. Marcus had spent years being funded by my father into one venture after another, a restaurant, a consulting firm, a thing involving cryptocurrency that I still don't think he could explain. Each one folded. Each one was followed by a family conversation about how Marcus was finding his footing and how the rest of us needed to be supportive. Supportive in our family was a verb that only ever pointed in one direction. The last venture failed big. And my father, whose own firm was quietly bleeding by then, did the thing I'd been dreading since the day I read Eleanor's trust documents. He came to me at my apartment alone and asked me to release some funds from the foundation to help Marcus restructure. I want to be precise about this because it's the hinge of everything. He didn't ask me for my money. He asked me for the foundation's money, charitable money, legally restricted, that could not be used to bail out his son's failed LLC without committing a crime that would have ended with all of us in a very different kind of room. And he asked me as though it were obviously mine to give and obviously his to receive. I said no. I want to tell you I said it strong and clear. I didn't. I stammered. I explained. I over-explained the way I always did, laying out the tax law and the fiduciary rules and the personal liability, trying to make him understand it wasn't that I wouldn't. It was that I couldn't. Please, Dad, it's not like that. I was still, at 31 years old, trying to be found innocent. He listened to all of it. Then he stood up, put on his coat and said, "So this is who you really are, after everything we gave you." And he left. Everything we gave you. I sat with that phrase for a long time after the door closed. I did the math the way I do. I could not find the everything. I found a lot of managing. I found a lot of shrinking. But I could not find the everything. 3 weeks later, the story started. I didn't hear it directly at first. I heard it the way you hear weather coming, a cousin who stopped returning my texts. An aunt who was suddenly so busy. Then my mother's sister, Aunt Carol, who has never in her life been able to keep a secret, called me just to check in. And in the course of not telling me anything, told me everything. My parents were saying that I'd gotten control of Grandma's money through manipulation, that I had isolated Eleanor in her final years, that I had turned a grieving old woman against her own son, that the foundation, which they still, in the same breath, described as theirs, had been compromised by Danielle's need for control. Do you see the shape of it? Do you see how beautiful the lie was? Structurally, they needed the money to be theirs so it could be a legacy, and they needed it to be stolen so I could be the villain. So they told both stories at once, to different rooms, and trusted that no one would ever line the two up side by side. Except numbers are the one thing that always line up eventually. That's the whole point of them. I made a mistake here, and I'll own it, because I promised you the truth and not the flattering version. My mistake was that I tried to fix it privately. I called my mother. I asked to meet. I genuinely thought that if I could just show them the trust documents, if they could just see in Eleanor's own hand what she'd wanted and why, the fever would break. I thought facts were medicine. We met at a coffee shop near my mother's church, a neutral-feeling place she chose, which should have told me something. I brought a folder. I always bring a folder. It's the only armor I know how to wear. Inside were copies of Eleanor's letter of intent, the trust formation documents, the years of foundation filings showing every dollar accounted for, every grant public record. My mother didn't open the folder. She looked at it on the table between us the way you'd look at something a cat dragged in. I don't need to read your paperwork, Danielle, she said. I know what my own mother-in-law would have wanted, and it wasn't this. Mom, it's literally her handwriting. You always did think you were smarter than the rest of us. She said it softly, almost tenderly, which was worse. You count everything. You've been counting against this family your whole life. And then she said the thing that became the title of this whole chapter of my life, the thing I still hear sometimes in the second before I fall asleep. You're a disgrace, Danielle. You took an old woman's confusion and you made yourself rich off of it, and now you sit there with your folder like it makes you clean. You're a disgrace to this family. I didn't rich myself off of anything. I'd never taken $1 of Eleanor's money for personal use. The trust didn't allow it. And more than that, I didn't want it. The money had never felt like mine. It felt like a responsibility I'd been handed by the only person who ever saw me. But sitting there, I understood something that changed the temperature of my whole body. She didn't actually believe I'd stolen anything. If she'd believed it, she'd have opened the folder to prove it. She didn't open the folder because she couldn't afford to find out she was wrong. The lie wasn't a mistake she was making. The lie was a decision she needed to keep making, because the truth that Eleanor had looked at her son and his wife and chosen the daughter they'd thrown away was unsurvivable to her. I left the folder on the table. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted her to have to physically move it. I walked out to my car and I sat in the parking lot and I did not cry, which surprised me. And then I understood that I wasn't crying because some part of me had finally, after 31 years, stopped waiting for the car in the driveway to be for me. That was the last real conversation I had with my mother for almost 3 years. I'd love to tell you that I walked away clean and healed and never looked back. That's not what happened. What happened is that I went quiet and small and ashamed, because when a whole family agrees on a story about you, the story starts to feel like weather, like something that's just true, like rain. I stopped going to family things because I stopped being invited, and then I told myself I preferred it. I threw myself into the foundation and into my job, and I let them keep saying whatever they said, because fighting it meant showing the documents, and showing the documents meant proving my grandmother had chosen me over my father, and even after everything, some cowardly, loyal cell in my body did not want to be the one who detonated that. So I let the lie stand. For years, I let it stand at the cost of my own name. Here's the part where I have to tell you about Priya, because without her, I don't think I'd have found the spine for any of what came later. Priya is the operations director I hired for the foundation in the second year, a former nonprofit CFO who took the job for less money than she was worth because she told me once she'd grown up watching her own family's charity get quietly looted by relatives, and she wanted to work somewhere the money actually did what it said it would. Priya had no patience for my shrinking. The first time I told her offhandedly that my father sometimes took credit publicly, but it's fine, it keeps the peace, she put down her pen and looked at me and said, "Danielle, whose name is on the fiduciary responsibility if this thing ever gets audited?" "Mine, just mine." "So you're taking all the risk," she said, "and letting him take all the credit, and you call that peace?" I didn't have an answer. She didn't need me to have one. She just let the question sit there, The way you let a stain set so you remember it's there. The thing that finally cracked it open wasn't dramatic. It was a grant application. About 1.5 years ago, a regional community fund reached out because they wanted to partner with the foundation on a scholarship program, real money, matching funds. The kind of thing Eleanor would have loved, because Eleanor believed the whole point of money was to get quiet kids into rooms they'd otherwise be kept out of. It was exactly the work I'd built the whole thing to do. And their due diligence, which any serious partner does, required a full accounting of the foundation's governance. Who founded it? Who administered it? Where the corpus came from? Standard stuff. The kind of stuff that, if you've been letting your father tell a false story for years, suddenly becomes a problem, because now a real institution is going to read the actual documents. I remember the exact moment, sitting across from Priya, when she slid the partner's questionnaire across the table and said, "You're going to have to tell them the truth, all of it. And once it's in writing to them, it's the truth on the record. You understand what that means." It meant the fiction was going to die, not because I chose to kill it, because the work I loved required it to be true. I could have said no to the partnership. I want to be honest, I considered it. I considered protecting the lie one more time, at the cost of the exact kind of program my grandmother built the money to fund. And in that consideration, I finally saw myself clearly, and I did not like what I saw. I had spent my whole life paying for my family's comfort with pieces of myself, and now I was about to pay for it with pieces of Eleanor's actual wish, with quiet kids who'd never get the room. So I said yes to the partnership, and I filled out the questionnaire truthfully. Eleanor's trust, my administration, the full provenance of every dollar. I signed it. And the moment I signed it, something I'd been carrying for 9 years set itself down. What I didn't know, what recontextualized everything that came after and everything that had come before, is that my father had also been telling a story to a bank. Here's what I pieced together later, and I'll give it to you the way it came to me in stages, because that's how the truth actually arrives. Not in a folder, but in fragments you have to sit up at night arranging. Aunt Carol, again bless her, curse her, let something slip about 18 months ago. My father's firm, the one whose success was the supposed source of all that generosity, was in serious trouble. Had been for years. And during those years when he'd been standing at podiums calling the foundation his legacy, he hadn't just been massaging his ego. He'd been using the appearance of the foundation, the implication that he controlled a $20 million charitable entity, as a kind of shadow on his balance sheet. Not fraud exactly, or not fraud he could be jailed for, but the soft kind of leverage where you let bankers and partners believe you sit near a large pile of money, and that belief opens doors that your actual finances would have kept shut. Do you see it now? Do you see why he needed the foundation to be his, and needed me to be the villain who'd compromised it? He didn't call me a disgrace because he believed I'd wronged Eleanor. He called me a disgrace because I was the one person alive who could, with a single truthful sentence to the wrong banker, reveal that the pile of money he'd been standing next to for years was never his to stand next to. My silence wasn't keeping the family peace. My silence was collateral. The night I understood that, I went back through everything, every "so this is who you really are," every warm nod during a speech. The nods weren't affection. The nods were a man checking that his collateral was still holding still. I had been so hungry for those nods that I'd mistaken a leash for a hand on my shoulder. I called Priya at 11 at night. She answered on the first ring because she's that kind of person. I told her the whole thing, the bank, the leverage, all of it. And there was a long silence. And then she said, "Okay. Then we protect the foundation, and we protect you, and we do it clean. No revenge. Revenge is just handing them a new story about you. We do it with the record." The record. God, I loved her for that. So here is what we actually did, and I want to be clear that it was not dramatic, because real accountability almost never is. We did not go to the news. We did not stage a confrontation. We did what boring, honest institutions do. We made the foundation's governance completely, aggressively transparent. We published the full history on the foundation's website, Eleanor's gift, the trust, the administration, all of it, plainly. No accusation, just fact. We formalized a real independent board so that the foundation's independence from my father was a matter of public record and could never again be quietly implied to be his. And through the new partnership, the foundation's actual structure became known to exactly the kind of serious people my father had been leaning on. I didn't have to accuse him of anything. That's the part that still amazes me. The truth, simply made visible, did all the work that 100 angry speeches never could. When the money was clearly, publicly, permanently not his, when it was on the record that the corpus came from Eleanor's trust and was administered by me under a real board, the shadow he'd been standing in front of simply wasn't there anymore. His partners started asking harder questions. Not because I told them to, because the fiction had a hole in it now, and money is very good at finding holes. The low point came in the middle of all this, and it wasn't financial. It was Marcus. Marcus called me, first time in years, and for about 4 minutes I let myself believe he was calling as a brother. He asked how I was. He said he'd been thinking about me, and then, gently, the way our whole family does its worst things gently, he got to it. Dad was really struggling, and couldn't I just quietly go back to how things were? Couldn't I let him keep his dignity? Did I really need to make Grandma's money into a weapon? I asked Marcus if he'd read the trust documents, the ones that had been public for a year now. He hadn't. Of course he hadn't. Nobody in my family had ever needed to read the truth, because they'd always had me to keep it filed away where it couldn't hurt them. Danielle, he said, and his voice cracked. And I want to be fair, I think the crack was real. I think somewhere in there he was actually frightened for our father. You're going to destroy this family. And I said the truest thing I've ever said to him. I said, Marcus, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped holding it up. He hung up. We haven't spoken since. That one I do grieve. Whatever Marcus was, he was the person I built pillow forts with when the house downstairs got loud, and I would be lying if I told you I let him go easily. I didn't. I still don't, some nights. So, the invitation, the cream envelope on the Tuesday, the foundation being renamed after me. You've been waiting the whole time to understand it, and here it is. And I promise you it's stranger and quieter than you're imagining. My father did not have a change of heart. Let me kill that hope right now, because I don't traffic in the kind of ending where the villain weeps and everyone hugs. What happened is this. When the new independent board took over the foundation's governance, the board we'd built specifically so it could never again be quietly claimed by anyone. One of their first acts, entirely without my involvement and frankly to my mortification, was to review the foundation's history and formally correct its name and its record. They voted to rename it in honor of the person whose lifelong stewardship and whose grandmother's intent had actually created it, not the Voss Family Foundation, the Eleanor Voss Fund. They proposed first, and then, reading her letter, the one that named me, they made it the Eleanor and Danielle Voss Fund, because Eleanor had written, in her own hand, that the money should carry the name of the only one of them who gave without counting. My parents received the same notice every stakeholder received, because they were, technically, on the historical donor rolls. The dedication ceremony wasn't my father honoring me. It was the institution correcting a 9-year lie in the most public, most permanent, most unimpeachable way an institution can, by carving the truth into the name of the thing itself. And my parents, who had built their entire social identity on that foundation being theirs, had 2 choices. Stay away and let everyone wonder why the family whose name was on the building for a decade skipped the dedication. Or come and stand in a room while the truth they'd spent years burying was read aloud, with Eleanor's letter, to everyone whose good opinion they'd traded their daughter for. They came. Of course they came. Reputation was always the thing they couldn't put down. I almost didn't go myself. I want you to know that. I stood in my apartment in the dress I'd bought, and I thought about the coffee shop, about the unopened folder, about being called a disgrace over a latte, and I thought, I don't owe them the side of me. But Priya, who was driving, texted me one line. This isn't for them. It's for Eleanor, and it's for you, and it's for the kid who's going to get the scholarship. So I went, I'm not going to give you a big confrontation because there wasn't one. And if I invented one, I'd be doing the thing my family always did, bending the truth into a better story. Here is what actually happened. I read a short piece about my grandmother. I did not mention my parents. I did not need to. I read Eleanor's own words about the value of the quiet ones, the ones kept in the corner, and I watched my mother's face do something in the 3rd row, and it was not the face of a woman who'd been vindicated. It was the face of a woman hearing her own choices read back to her in her mother-in-law's handwriting. Afterward, my father found me by the door. He looked older than the last time, smaller, the way people look when the thing that inflated them has gone out. He didn't apologize. I want to be honest, because you deserve honesty after coming this far. He did not apologize. What he said was, "Your grandmother always did like to make a point." Even then, even standing under my name on the wall, he made it about Eleanor being difficult rather than about him being wrong. And I felt the old muscle twitch the urge to smooth it over, to say something that would let him keep his dignity, to be, one more time, the daughter who holds the ceiling up so no one has to notice it was falling. I didn't. I said, "She did?" And I let the silence be his to fill, and he couldn't fill it. And after a moment, he walked back to my mother, and they left before the reception, and that was the last time I saw them in person. That was 14 months ago. Here's where things actually stand, because I don't believe in endings that tie themselves in a bow. My parents and I don't speak. My father's firm restructured, smaller, quieter, still standing. No dramatic ruin, because real life doesn't hand you a collapse just because you'd feel avenged by one. Marcus and I don't speak either, and every few months my phone lights up with his name and I look at it and I don't answer, and I'm not always sure I'm making the right choice. And I've made my peace with not being sure. Aunt Carol still calls. She's the only one. She never picked a side because Carol has never in her life picked anything, but she calls. And there's a small mercy in that. My mother sent one letter about 6 months ago. This one was thick. I recognized the handwriting and my whole body did the old thing, the bracing. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days. When I finally opened it, it was 4 pages. And it was not an apology either. It was a long, careful reframing of the last decade in which she had only ever wanted what was best, and I had misunderstood everything. And it ended with a suggestion that we put the money aside and just be a family again. Put the money aside, as though the money had ever been the thing, as though I'd fought for $1 of it for myself. I read it twice. Then I did something I could not have done at 31. I filed it. Not in the trash. I'm not made of stone, but in a drawer, unanswered, because I finally understood that some letters are written to make the writer feel better, not to reach you. And you are allowed to receive them and simply not become the instrument of someone else's relief. The scholarship program funded its first cohort this year, 19 kids. I read every application myself. There was one, a girl from a town near where Eleanor grew up, whose essay was about being the invisible one in a loud family, about learning to disappear so other people could take up space, and I sat in my office and I cried. The way I hadn't cried in that parking lot 9 years earlier. All of it at once. Finally. Safely. People ask me sometimes, the few people who know the whole story, whether it was worth it, whether losing my family was worth a name on a wall and a fund that does what a dead woman wanted. And I understand why they ask, but the question has it backwards. I didn't lose my family to win the foundation. I'd lost my family a long time ago, at every dinner I managed instead of enjoyed, at every nod I mistook for love, at every folder I brought that no one would open. The foundation didn't cost me my family. The foundation is just where I finally stopped paying for a family I never actually had, and started spending on the one thing my grandmother and I both believed in, getting the quiet ones into the room. My name is Danielle Voss. For 31 years I was told I was a disgrace to my family. It turned out the family was built on a story, and I was the only one still willing to tell the truth, and the truth, when I finally stopped holding it back, didn't need me to raise my voice. It just needed me to stop covering for it. If any part of this found you where you're sitting, if you're the quiet one, the practical one, the one who's been holding up a ceiling nobody thanks you for, I hope you'll stay for the next story, because I tell these for the ones in the corner. You were never the disgrace. You were just the only one who could count.